Recording.
All
Let me
right.
just. Hey, okay. So do you want to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about you, your name, where you work, things like that?
Yeah, so well, my name's Kari Kussmann, and I'm a teacher. Right now, I'm an eighth grade humanities teacher at an all boys middle school in Berkeley. And I've been teaching, this is my second year, going into my second year teaching humanities, and I taught Spanish for 5 years before that.
Nice.
And I've worked in all boys middle schools and I've worked in public high schools.
Nice. So how are you guys, first of all, how did you guys go into dealing with the pandemic right when it hit? And how are you guys dealing with it now?
Um, I think that this is probably how a lot of people felt. Nobody, no teacher, like transitioned into the pandemic in the same way.
Hmm.
Like, and I think that had a lot to do with, frankly, your home life situation. I was lucky enough that I don't have any kids at home and I don't have any dependents who I need to care for. So I transitioned pretty quickly into online teaching and like doing Zoom classes with my students pretty fast.
Yeah.
Um, but I also have because I work at a private school, we're able to do things a little faster because there's not the need to kind of go through the district. But some people really struggled with that. Like it's really hard to care for a newborn baby or for some kids of your own and educate them while you're trying to work full time. I think anyone can relate to that. So I think that our experience though was pretty how a lot of people had it.
That's good. So did it feel more adaptable to you? Like you were able to adapt to it quickly?
Yeah, I think this is where being a millennial was really helpful. The internet and I grew up together.
Yeah.
So adapting to new technology is like part of our DNA as millennials. And so for me, I adapted pretty quickly. I just knew right away that I wanted to see my students on Zoom and I wanted as much normalcy as possible. Um, I see my students every day for at least an hour and a half. So to go from that to not seeing each other at all was really disruptive, I think, for me and for them.
Got
So
it.
I did it pretty fast. I think I was the fastest to do it at my school, but that was partly because I just kind of didn't know any other way at first.
So, what's the class like? Or what's the class vibe like if you're on Zoom? Like, how is it that you keep your students focused, whether they're all in a different household? Like if they could have their other brothers and sisters screaming, they could have their mom talking on the phone. Like, what does
Mhm.
that look like? How do you keep them engaged?
It's so hard. I think like the humble answer is like, I don't know if they were engaged fully.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
um, like I want to say, oh, they were so engaged, but I'm like, I don't know.
Okay. So the whole time you're just like teaching, um, do you ask questions and stuff? Like, do they?
Yeah. So, okay. So I guess I'll say like what worked for me. And some of the things that worked for me was like continuing as much as I could with the norms of my in-person class and transitioning those to online. So in many ways, I think teachers that may have had a very lecture-based
Mhm.
class or a class where you didn't have kind of established norms and expectations are really going to struggle with online because
Oh, okay, got it.
whereas my kiddos kind of knew, like, I'm going to cold call you. I expect full participation. I expect you to let me know if you're late, why you're late. And then I had to work really hard to just have a patient tone and be really understanding. And also, I had to adapt to the fact that, like, they just couldn't be on a computer screen for very long. So I had to make the most of our time together. But we used breakout rooms. I would usually share a screen. They were used to having a slide deck. So I carried that
Mhm.
over so that they knew what was happening. But it really is just about like a lot of in-person teaching norms work well online, which is like you shouldn't be talking for more than like 2 minutes before you engage the students in some way.
Got it.
And I was lucky that my kiddos were pretty great with breakout rooms. I could see that being like a complete shit show. I mean, but I'd like bounce back and forth and kind of just sit there in silence with my mic off, just listening, and they'd be like, "Oh man, we got to keep going." Um,
What
so
are what are
yeah.
some, I would say, some hardships on children setting excuses, or why they were late, or why they didn't show up to class, because it's still class, it's still considered class. What are some hardships dealing with that? Like, how do you deal with that? Is that based off of a grade? Do you based off of participation, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, so we went to pass fail, which I was really grateful for.
Hmm.
Um, and sorry, my niece is playing with Legos in the background.
No worries.
I can actually ask her to. Do you want me to?
No, 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 it's okay, it's okay, you're
Sorry
fine.
about that. So, I went to pass fail, and I guess I think when you work with young people, we get into this mindset of like young people don't want to learn. Young people just want to slack off. Whereas like young people are actually super interested in learning and they're super interested in engaging with one another. And if you can make the material interesting enough, if you can bring them into it and make them feel like they have some choice in what they're doing, that it reflects their identity and their values and also just like their curiosities, and it allows them to connect, most importantly, connect with one another, they're usually pretty motivated. Like I didn't actually have a lot of issues with students bailing on class for any reason that didn't seem really reasonable, which was like technology and space.
That's
Like
really good.
I had a couple kids whose internet was so poor that they could basically not contribute to any discussions unless it was in the chat. Um, and it was really
Wow,
painful
so do
to
they just use the chat?
it had to be that way. And it was really painful because they show up and they're so engaged and they're so curious and they're very like eighth graders have a lot of opinions. And so they have these ideas and they like literally can't get them out
Yeah.
because of their internet. Um,
Wow.
that was like, to be honest, like heartbreaking at times because of how helpless I felt in being able to do anything about their situation.
Yeah.
Uh, like I could go get them a computer. Like I had a kiddo whose computer broke and I like emailed my school and like went and picked up a laptop and delivered it to them. Like I can bring books to them, I can bring materials to them, I can print out things for them, but I can't bring internet to them.
Yeah, correct.
So that's really what it was the hardest thing.
So, now that now that I heard how you deal with, like, the teaching online now, how are you guys going to transition, or what's the plan of you guys transitioning now as a private school when all this is over, or before all this is over? I'm not really sure how you guys are dealing with it.
So I think because we have to follow local health mandates, that we will be following pretty close to whatever Berkeley Unified is doing, pretty close.
Okay.
My though, what's interesting is I thought that my school, because we're smaller, would be in a different situation, but it sounds like what we're going through is pretty universal, which is the following. We are getting mixed messages, confusing guidance. We're getting guidance from our boss saying it's going to be safe because kids can't really spread it, and we're going to do pods, and it's going to look something like that, but we still don't know. To like me reading the news and being like, wait, all these other school districts are closing down, and like 1,000 kids in Florida under 1 year old just got the virus. I'm like, what is going on?
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I don't think, as far as I know, my school has not offered or given any training or any materials on how to teach online. And the only teacher friend of mine whose school is doing that works at the higher education level. She works at a community college. Um, so what's really feeling frustrating is it feels like the admin in both public and private schools are basically living in this fantasy world, like we're going to find a way to be in person, instead of living in the reality of like we need to train our teachers how to teach online.
Right.
And
So you got no training on how to start teaching online. You guys just winged it pretty much.
no, we have not gotten any training on how to teach online. In fact, it was like I've been doing other reading for the summer, more like pedagogical and like history reading. And
Hmm.
just this week, I was like, next week, I need to like set the books aside and like dive hardcore into the resources available online. And then I need to aggregate them and send them to my colleagues. And I'll likely create a public document that I can share publicly and just say, like, hey, these are the
Wow.
resources I found helpful. Here's because it's just like we're all in this together. And I've been thinking a lot about like, what can I do to support those of us in education? Like,
Yeah.
I may want to abolish the system, but it's a system we're in right now. You
I
know?
mean, that's good that you're trying to find different ways though to help other people, to help your colleagues, to help even people in districts, you know, because you guys are not. You would think as a private school, you guys would get those resources at
Well,
least, right?
most
Or
private schools are the same. Mine is not particularly well funded because we don't have an endowment. We don't like collect money at the end of the year and like keep saving it. All of we actually send 50% of our resources back into financial aid, um, which from a value
oh
standpoint
wow,
is really great. Like it actually means we have a far more diverse student body than a lot of private schools. And it also means that our school doesn't kind of function in a hyper capitalist system in that way.
yeah,
'Cause we're not all like we don't do heavy fundraising and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, that tuition, even if it's somebody paying, you know, $1,000 for the year, does pay my salary. And I get that this is what's so messed up about private education. Like the fact that we use a market-based approach, like a capitalist model for education, is so messed up to me. And I have these like existential crises all the time working in private school. Like they're worried that if we don't go online completely, that people just will stop paying tuition.
do you think that's the case though? Because when all this opens back up, don't you think people would still enroll their kids in private schools?
Um, you know, in some ways, I wish that was the case. Like, I
Uh-huh.
wish we would just stop, like, private schools would basically end, and
Yeah.
then people would actually be invested in our public school infrastructure. What I think is really going to happen is what I saw already happening in the spring, which is a crisis in equity. And it's not just private schools, but what you're really seeing is you're seeing schools, private schools in particular, who have mine is sort of an anomaly, but most of them have a lot of resources for online teaching, for one-to-one technology, meaning like every student has a computer, for online resources, smaller class, like all these things. They're able to
Wow.
adapt really fast. They usually have more staffing. So what and so those private schools are typically able to have more online courses, have a more robust curriculum, so at the end of this school year, and because those families have more resources because they
Right.
can pay for private school, those kids, probably most of them, ended the last school year not with a huge knowledge gap. Like there wasn't a huge loss for them. Now, social emotionally and like socially, yes, huge loss. Public school districts that I'm aware of, and these are the ones my friends work in and the ones I tutor for, had a huge knowledge gap. Like those students lost so much learning in those months that I think a lot of the families with resources are going to leave public education, go to private education, and we are going to really see like a massive shift in how many people are actually going to public schools. And then the flip side, the families that stay in public schools, I already saw this. They're going to start potting up. Like the stay-at-home moms are going to pot up with other stay-at-home moms and their kids, and they're going to do some homeschooling. And like that's like
Well, you know, now we have access,
what
right. Now we have access to the internet, and I'm sure a lot of moms, I mean, I do it here with my niece as well because we babysit her, and we just start, you know, teaching her things. I didn't know that was actually starting up though. I didn't know moms were actually doing
it's totally happening. And like also people are paying for tutors.
that.
Like
Right.
you have all these teachers who maybe have a little extra time and don't make very much money. And
Yeah.
you've got families being like, hey, we'll pay you $500 a week. We'll pay you $1,000 a month. I don't know, whatever, to do 3 1-hour sessions online and tutor our kids. Or they'll be like, will you pod up with the 4 kids and do in person with them? You know?
Right.
And it's a huge equity issue. And that's just like the teaching side. This isn't even like the technology resources side. Like my brother-in-law works as a special ed teacher in Seattle Unified,
Mm-hmm.
and he spent 3 months just trying to get computers to all of his students.
Wow.
Like 2 of his students are unhoused and a couple others are housing insecure. And
So as a teacher, how far can you go with helping with like the children with that? I'm not a teacher, so I don't know the regulations. Like how far can you go? Like can you go talk to the family? Can you go, you know, actually can you actually donate to this child? Like what's the furthest you can go to help this child?
there's legal, obviously there's legal stuff.
Yeah.
There's legal stuff and there's also sociocultural stuff. Like I had a student who was in a really tough situation, and I started to suspect that his family was food insecure.
Hmm.
But I was really close with the student, but like, and I'll take this on, like I hadn't developed a close relationship with his parents. And so I wasn't in a position to like ask about it. And if I did ask, like, hey, how are you guys doing? Do you need anything? It was always, no, we're fine, we're fine, we're fine.
Oh, wow.
Um, I had a couple other kids I was really worried about, and it's a real hard balance. I think though the key when you're a teacher or whether you're a social worker or whether you're just an involved community member is like never give up. Like find the ways to meet people's needs, and if you and be really like really listen. Like if you hear a need, fill that need. So this was a kid who was like computer broke, and I was like, I can get you a computer, no problem. Like this is easy. You just I mean it was like my whole day, but I was like, no problem, easy for me. I'll just go get
Yeah.
it. Like I'm asking about, you know what I mean? Because that family, if I had been like, do you need me to get you a computer? They would have said no.
Yeah. I
So
mean, that's great that you had empathy towards that, you know? Like at the end, that was great advice. I'm not even a teacher, and that was very, just heart-waking and understanding. Like at the end of the day, this child is a human and can't get a computer. If I can get him a computer or resources or a book to, you know, I guess not use a computer, but I can get him this book that he could still learn the same thing, then, that would work.
yeah, I think it's really important that all of us have a real equity mindset about this.
Yeah.
Like I had a colleague who biked to a few students' homes when she
Hmm.
knew that they were just having a hard time because she knew that they just needed to see somebody in person. And I remember being like she really struggled with the online teaching, but I
Yeah.
remember being like, man, like that really fills a need. And I was like, it didn't make me be like, I got to get on my bike and bike everywhere, but it made me be like, oh, when I notice a need, just do something.
Yeah.
Like if you suspect that somebody's food insecure, just bring them a meal. Just be like, hey, I made this like baked pasta dish. I'd love to bring it over. Would you like it?
True.
So
I agree.
it's, but I think we have an unfortunate issue where like there's a lot of mistrust, understandably, in educators and education. And I think if you're a teacher that has during the pandemic not encountered or spoken with or seen that realized that one of your students is having a hard time or their family's having a hard time, then you haven't done a good enough job getting to know your students and their families.
That's
Because
powerful.
it's impossible for me to believe that you could have a whole group of students and every single one of them is like just fine.
Yeah.
you know?
I agree. Because as humans, I mean, even as adults, we're not just fine. So that's completely hard to believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate you even, just sharing your story as an educator, and sharing. I didn't know that you guys weren't actually getting the resources of teaching online, because I would even think that they'll send like, sometimes they send certain tutorials or, little clips or things like that. I would think that that was provided, but I guess you guys winged it too, just like everyone else did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I tried to step up because I just felt passionate about it and like send through resources. And I made a couple video tutorials for my colleagues on how to use Google Classroom, how to
Mhm.
use other online tools, because a lot of folks are really struggling to switch over. But I still am like, I'm not an expert. Like, I shouldn't be teaching them how to do this.
Yeah. I mean, whenever you do the, what did you say you were gonna do? An art, was it article or a like tutorial on how to do Zoom? Not
Oh,
Zoom, but online.
yeah, what I was gonna do, I want to try to devote like my evenings next week to doing online
Uh-huh.
research and watching some videos and doing some see what online seminars are. And then I was gonna create a public document with the links and like just being
Got
like,
it, got
hey,
it.
if you're having trouble with this is the tutorial I recommend. Here's the article I recommend. And just create a public, like basically a public Google document that I can share on, the socials. And that the other thing I'm considering, and I'm worried about bandwidth here,
Yeah.
but I would love, if I can, to essentially offer my class, my 8th grade humanities class, to the public and my local community public, and just be like, listen, if you are not feeling like you're getting, if you want to add more education into your child's life, here's what I want to do. I just really am like, honestly, what I've kind of struggled with is like, I already work at a private school. I already know the community that I currently serve, and I would like to serve students that wouldn't necessarily have access to a private school to that
Right.
stuff. And so I've been thinking a lot about like, how do I structure this so that that's really clear, you know? Because I just want to be of use, and like my skill set is as a teacher. So what could I do to perhaps like just offer something to my broader community? And so I've been thinking about offering essentially just like a public free class once a week on like 8th grade
That'd
humanities.
be amazing. So if you do come up with all of that, feel free to send it to me so I can actually attach it to this video that I'll,
Oh, okay,
yeah, and I feel like people would just be able to click on the link and boom, it'll be public. So
cool. And I guess on that note, like I've been thinking, I'm like, I could totally do a public, like I could do the class in Spanish also.
yeah.
'Cause I know LA, San Francisco's behind. LA has a really robust, at least dual language immersion program. And in middle school, they actually teach social studies in Spanish. So I've been like,
Mhm.
oh, like, should I try to offer it in Spanish? Would that be useful? Like, be a little tough, like, stuff like that. I've been just
Yeah.
thinking a lot about like what I might be able to do.
I think that'd be amazing. I mean, like you said.